Welcome to our channel Port Zone. Topic of today: Jordan Peterson most popular quotes. Don't compare yourself with other people, compare yourself with who you were yesterday. The idea that women were oppressed throughout history is an appalling theory. Abortion is clearly wrong. It's in responsibility that most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness. It's not in impulsive pleasure. I don't tell people, you're okay the way that you are. That's not the right story. The right story is, you're way less than you could be. It is more difficult to rule yourself than to rule a city. Happiness is a pointless goal. Adopt responsibility for your own well-being, try to put your family together, try to serve your community, try to seek for eternal truth. That's the sort of thing that can ground you in your life, enough so that you can withstand the difficulty of life. Women deeply want men who are competent and powerful. And I don't mean power in that they can exert tyrannical control over others. That's not power. That's just corruption. Accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. The truth is something that burns. It burns off dead wood. And people don't like having the dead wood burnt off, often because they're 95% dead wood. Don't lie about anything, ever. Lying leads to hell. Music has an intrinsic meaning, which has always been mysterious to me. There's a personality trait known as agreeableness. Agreeable people are compassionate and polite. And agreeable people get paid less than disagreeable people for the same job. Women are more agreeable than men. No one gets away with anything, ever, so take responsibility for your own life. If you learn a martial art, you learn to be dangerous, but simultaneously, you learn to control it. Men and women aren't the same. And they won't be the same. That doesn't mean that they can't be treated fairly. Free speech is not just another value. It's the foundation of Western civilization. Power is competence. Life is very difficult. One of the most ancient of religious ideas that emerges everywhere, I would say, is that life is essentially suffering. The masculine spirit is under assault. It's obvious. If you're talking to a man who wouldn't fight with you under any circumstances whatsoever, then you're talking to someone for whom you have absolutely no respect. If you don't stand your ground, then all that happens is people push you backwards. It makes sense that a witch lives in a swamp. One of the things I've told men over and over and over and over is if you're being rejected by all the women that you approach, it's not the women. Don't be dependent. At all. Ever. Period. Become aware of your own insufficiency. The people who hold that our culture is an oppressive patriarchy, they don't want to admit that the current hierarchy might be predicated on competence. To me, ideology is corrupt, it's a parasite on religious structures. To be an ideologue is to have all of the terrible things that are associated with religious certainty and none of the utility. If you're an ideologue, you believe everything that you think. If you're religious, there's a mystery left there. There were some great clinicians in the 20th century, great men. Freud was a genius, Jung was a genius, Carl Rogers was a genius, there's a half-dozen psychologists of the 1950s and humanists of the 1960s. When you start to realize how much of what you've constructed of yourself is based on deception and lies, that is a horrifying realization. The most propagandistic element of Frozen was the transformation of the prince at the beginning of the story, who was a perfectly good guy, into a villain with no character development whatsoever about 3/4 of the way to the ending. It's very hard to find your own words, and you don't actually exist until you have your own words. Life is tragic. You are tiny and flawed and ignorant and weak, and everything else is huge, complex, and overwhelming. I have something in common with Nazis in that I am opposed to the radical left. And when you oppose the radical left, you end up being a part of a much larger group that includes Nazis in it. I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time, for 40 years, and they're started by people's attempts to control the ideological and linguistic territory. To master a new technology, you have to play with it. If you want to occupy the C-suite or the top 0.1% in any organization, you have to be obsessively devoted to your career at the expense of everything else. And women look at that, and they think, no. If you're not going to be rewarded for your virtues, and instead you're going to be punished for them, then what's your motivation to continue? Once someone has spent enough time cultivating bad habits and biding their time, they are much diminished. Much of what they could have been has dissipated. I have a hard time figuring out what kind of box to put me in, too, because I don't know exactly what's going on around me or why. But I need to stay outside of boxes because then I can look at what's inside of them without being part of them. You can't have a value structure without a hierarchy. They're the same thing because a value structure means one thing takes precedence over another. The highly functional infrastructure that surrounds us, particularly in the West, is a gift from our ancestors. The comparatively uncorrupt political and economic systems, the technology, the wealth, the lifespan, the freedom, the luxury, and the opportunity. You may say, well, dragons don't exist. It's like, yes they do. The category, predator, and the category, dragon, are the same category. It absolutely exists. It's a superordinate category. It exists absolutely more than anything else. In fact, it really exists. I happen to be a big fan of Western civilization. I think it beats the hell out of tyranny and starvation. If you're a social scientist worth your salt, you never do a univariate analysis. As pessimistic as I am about the nature of human beings and our capacity for atrocity and malevolence and betrayal and laziness and inertia, and all those things, I think we can transcend all that and set things straight. You should do what other people do, unless you have a very good reason not to.